So we'll just go ahead and bring them on in turn.
Okay, Daniel Schoorl, are you still on the line?
I am, thank you.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Miller, President Taylor, and committee members. My name is Daniel Schoorl. I work as a legislative advocate at SEIU Local 1000. Apologize for not being in person today. I'm currently under the weather. Still wanted to speak briefly to item 5D. While aligning my comments with those of Bobby Roy and Terry Brennan's, wanted to start by sharing that SEIU Local 1000 respectfully calls on the board to place a moratorium on new Exxon bond investments. Exxon is a company that opposes efforts to address climate change and not a company whose value aligns with CalPERS sustainability standards. Beyond the issue of investing, to align with investment goals is a question of timeline. These bonds do not mature until 2074. Timeline is decades longer than typical corporate bonds. To not align with CalPERS standards and becomes a potential long-term threat to guaranteeing retirement security to public sector workers. Local 1000 appreciates your consideration in placing a moratorium on new Exxon bonds, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next caller.
Chairman Miller, we have Jason Disterhoft from Majority Action to speak to item 5D.
Hi, my name is Jason Disterhoft with Majority Action, an advocacy group focusing on climate change and racial inequity and proxy voting tools to mitigate those risks to shareholder value. We appreciate trustees and staff's ongoing efforts regarding sustainable investment and stewardship, and thank you for the presentation and discussion today. CalPERS has a long track record of setting the bar for these vital issues, and the fund's leadership role will be more important than ever in the coming years. I wanted to raise a question regarding the figures on slide 7 regarding the fund's working assumptions on climate risk. The slide reports that MSCI Climate VaR estimates that 1.5 to 2 degrees of climate change would cost the fund between 0.7% and 1.5% due to transition risk in terms of a drag on performance. And physical risk is projected to cost the fund 0.4%. So the slide acknowledges that the physical risk figure is quote, likely underestimated. I want to raise the possibility that all of these figures need to be increased significantly. For example, this month, the Network for Greening the Financial System projected that global economic growth could slow by 30% due to climate change by the end of the century. And even this finding has been criticized as likely an underestimate for not taking into account the impact of tipping points, such as the slowdown of the Atlantic current, the AMOC. Another study this year from Bilal and Kenzig, economists at Stanford and Northwestern, found that each degree of climate change leads to a persistent 12% hit to GDP. So these very alarming findings suggest that we need to look again at the MSCI assumptions, and that raises a further question. CalPERS' current sustainability investment and stewardship strategies are based on a particular set of assumptions. If those assumptions are too low, what revisions of the strategies would be called for? The concern, of course, is that a bad enough hit to beta will swamp CalPERS' portfolio resilience efforts, threatening returns going forward. To put things another way, say the threat is much worse than we think, what more would the fund be doing? For example, some of these topics have been addressed already today. Are there changes called for in terms of allocation screens, bond purchases, or solutions, investment in solutions? Is there anything more the fund can do not only as an active owner, but also as an active client, ensuring that its managers and private equity partners are fully aligned with climate action? In our own view, the massive threat of climate change calls for a robust precautionary approach, prioritizing action to avoid the worst case scenarios. As I noted, CalPERS' work continues to be absolutely vital, has been for many years. Thank you again for your leadership, and we look forward to CalPERS continuing to set the bar going forward.
Thank you. Do we have another caller?
Yes, Chairman Miller, we have Greg Lichtenstein to speak to item 5D.
Hi there, this is Greg Lichtenstein. I'm a CalPERS retiree after 33 years of service as a physician and administrator at San Diego State University. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss portfolio sustainability and risk. The burning of fossil fuels is the major driver of climate change and significantly impacts the long-term performance of our retirement portfolio, as you know. I appreciate Mr. Cashin and his team prioritizing decarbonization as well as returns. However, I was surprised to hear that the portfolio managers have been considering a purchase of Exxon bonds that mature 5 decades from now. I believe it was mentioned earlier that we're not looking for new investments of this kind. We must stop funding environmental destruction, starting with major offenders like ExxonMobil. Since the 1970s, Exxon's denied climate change while concealing its own scientists' global warming projections. The company's resisted shareholder efforts, including those by CalPERS to transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energy, and even sued activist investors who sponsored these resolutions, leading CalPERS to a no confidence vote against Exxon's entire board of directors earlier this year. Additionally, our state has joined a lawsuit with several other states against Exxon, other major fossil fuel companies, and the American Petroleum Institute for misleading the public about their role in global warming. Recently, our state's own attorney general sued Exxon for deceiving the public about recyclability of single-use plastics that are now polluting our oceans, lands, and bodies. As discussed by today's speakers, CalPERS has a fiduciary duty to focus more on climate-related risks in its modeling, given the fossil fuel industry's volatility and its exposure to environmental damage-related lawsuits. The retirement funds managers also need to consider impacts on the future performance of its other investments, including those in insurance and real estate sectors that are affected by climate change. We should not purchase Exxon bonds that mature beyond CalPERS' own net zero deadline and encourage further extraction of fossil fuels, their leaky transportation, and their combustion. Because of our fund size, CalPERS sets an example for other investors. I urge the board and its fund managers to do what's right from a sustainability and fiduciary perspective and channel more of our investments into promoting clean energy rather than into Exxon. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other callers?
Yes, Chairman Miller, we have Sara Feeth from Fossil Free California to speak to item 5D.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sara Feeth, a member of Fossil Free California. And as a CalPERS retiree, thank you for my wonderful retirement and for the thoughtfulness of the 2023 Sustainable Investing Plan, including its attention to greenwashing. And I welcome Mr. Gilmore and look forward to seeing his impact on investment strategy. I have 3 points to make. First, I agree with the others today who've spoken against using our pension money to support Exxon, especially for another 74 years. I know you understand how recalcitrant Exxon continues to be in terms of a smooth transition, despite Darren Woods claiming to favor the Paris Agreement. Moreover, according to the International Energy Agency, no fossil fuel extraction progress are needed in its net zero emissions by 2050 plan, and other than projects already committed as of 2021, there can be no new oil and gas fields approved for development in the IEA pathway of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Second, I appreciate that CalPERS is working hard at climate solution investments, yet as today's slideshow recognizes, these rely on various unknown risks. For example, emerging solutions, financial transition risk, committed risk investments, etc. On the other hand, cutting off Exxon's access to bonds will have immediate known impacts, and CalPERS as a leader will influence others to do the same. Solutions can only go so far if we continue to cause the problem we're trying to solve. For these reasons, I also suggest that continued investments, such as the 75-year Exxon bond, are ill-advised. My final point relates to a remark earlier that I understood to mean that the incoming administration may provide an opportunity for additional profits vis-a-vis the oil and gas industry. I hope you really look into that. because just in the past week, I've read a couple of articles that according to the IEA's World Energy Outlook 2024, it forecasts an oil supply surplus of over 1 billion barrels next year. And the industry also faces the fact that the surging supply is set to outstrip demand, which will create an liquid natural gas supply glut that's likely to persist well into the 1930s. And of course, an oil glut presents further risk by driving down prices for LNG sold under oil-linked contracts. Another reason not to get these Exxon bonds. And, you know, I can only imagine how taxing these multiple days meetings are. So thanks for listening, and happy holidays, and see you next year. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any more callers?
Yes, we do, Chairman Miller. We have John and Judith Kirk. Go ahead.
Judith Kirk, Redwood City, California, and my health insurance is through CalPERS. You've already heard excellent reasons to stop these bond purchases, some of which are Exxon's bullying behaviors to those who question what they're doing, which is burning up the planet. I'm speaking to Exxon's impact on me, my community, and on the planet Exxon and friends have already damaged beyond fixing completely. But hopefully something can be done to help life survive on this planet, but not in any of the ways involving fossil fuels we're used to. Exxon and other fossil fuel giants have already made the survival of my children and grandchildren questionable. Bluntly, they face a dystopian future because of Exxon and others' sociopathic greed and lying. I think this is reason enough to stop these bond purchases. All of this, quote, rational and financial, unquote, talk is beside the point. The point is to stop burning up the only planet we have to live on. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any?
Chairman Miller, our last caller is Dan Fuchs to speak to item 5D.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Miller and board. My name is Dan Fuchs. I live in Midtown Sacramento. I'm a CalPERS beneficiary and frankly hope to retire in the next 4 to 5 years. I very much welcome and commend the board for its sustainability engagement and listened with great interest to the presentation this afternoon. Like several of your other callers and speakers, I am here to ask that the board exit from Exxon and not buy any more Exxon bonds. As we've seen in the presentation today, and we acknowledge that engagement can be a powerful tool for shareholders to persuade companies to improve their practices. However, for successful engagement to work, a company needs to be willing to change. Exxon is not such a company. It has responded to engagement by suing its shareholders and has then threatened to double down with the threat of additional lawsuits against investors like CalPERS that dare to challenge its practices. In this case, Exxon is not only unwilling to change to meet shareholder pressure to improve sustainability practices, but is putting shareholders like CalPERS at risk through lawsuits. So Exxon is an example where engagement has just not been enough. Rather than adjust to the fiduciary goals and approaches that CalPERS is pushing for, Exxon attacked shareholders, lied to consumers and the public, and has incurred dozens of lawsuits, including, as you heard, by the state of California itself. Exxon's October bond issuance had a maturity date of 2074, 24 years after CalPERS's net zero deadline. We admire CalPERS's net zero deadline, and we wish it to be met. But given Exxon's clear intransigence, it is time for CalPERS to take the next step and adopt a moratorium on any new bond investments in Exxon. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another caller?
No more callers.